Cool.
Fotopackage, here.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Like give me POIs in the chat like normal people and we'll be fine. Great. Let's start in three, two, one, let's go. Panel, if I married for love, I would have married debating around 4 years ago, and it would have gone horribly. And I think all of you know why. The decision of marrying for utility means that I may still focus on something in my life that has like a modicum of usefulness for the world. And I think everyone here can recognize that that is the superior choice. Just to make this debate like fair and debatable in the first place, what do we mean with utility? We're not just going to define utility as like happiness or something. We're going to try and take a meaningful and hard burden in this debate and say that utility is factors here that like contribute to the success of your life or a relationship that are distinct and very different from love. So we think like marrying a partner that has a good job would be marrying for utility, or looking for someone specifically with like a lot of emotional stability, but maybe they're like boring and an accountant and their main hobby is like having Excel spreadsheets. That would be marrying for utility. Or marrying someone because you think like their extended family is going to provide a valuable support network for your life. The second thing we want to say is that either side in this debate has to defend making their factor the dominant decision factor here. So no one gets to say like 50-50 bullshit. No, we're saying like maybe you get 10% love, but that's it. The rest is utility, and you better like fucking eat your carrots. Okay, cool. Now, an important framing for this debate is where does this happen? So, obviously, like this debate happens all over the world. So if we look at like the median marriage, that currently happens somewhere in India and probably between people who roughly have like a daily income of 20 euros-ish. In this context, we think marrying for utility is incredibly important. And I'm going to outline all the reasons for why utility good, then why love bad, and then why we get love anyway, maybe. Cool. So first, why utility good? So I already said, like the kind of people we're talking about live in medium economic precarity and are highly vulnerable to like macroeconomic shifts, to like bad climate patterns, to broader like urban instability. So marrying someone with a good job is something that can meaningfully improve the quality of your life and the stability of your life in the face of quite meaningful danger. What we're saying here is like having a rich husband or wife in as opposed to like a not particularly rich husband or wife means that you can send your children to a good school rather than like not really a school at all, or you can only send one of your children to school. It means you can pay for surgeries. Sometimes these are life-saving surgeries. Sometimes these are just surgeries that prevent you from years of chronic pain. In both cases, though, these are medical interventions that will likely like extend your life by a couple of years and have a strong impact on your quality of life in the in the intervening time. It also means you can crisis-proof your life. If one of you has like an accident and can't work for a year, do you have the savings to cover that? If you suddenly have to relocate because of a natural disaster, if you have to relocate because you're Muslim and like Modi keeps whipping up hate in Hindu communities against your religious minority, you have the economic capacity to relocate your family. So first point, why money matters. Second point, why might it matter to have a partner with a lot of emotional stability or like a good temper? Now, we don't think this means like Op has to marry someone insane, but it means like they will comparatively value these factors less. And we will actively make the choice of saying like someone I don't find particularly attractive, but not repulsive, who's like boring and nice, is someone we would actively choose to marry. Whereas I don't think Op can say that. So here we think that, there's a 50% chance in this debate that you're a woman. And there's like a potential that your husband might become abusive later on, and that it's very hard for you to live in a culture where you can divorce this person, or where like the rest of the culture has lots of institutions set up to protect this person and to make it very hard for you to fight against this kind of abuse. Someone boring but unlikely to abuse you is something that like over 20-30 years can save you from a lot of hurt. It also means like marrying a person that is unlikely to make rash decisions will improve your life outcomes drastically. Again, if you have the kind of partner who's like a bit of a poet, a bit of a dreamer, and one day is like, fuck the capitalist grind, I'm quitting my job, I'm becoming like a farmer. that's really bad if you have bills to pay. So you likely don't want to marry that person. Also, just like valuing good health in your partner. If you have a partner who has like a chronic pain condition, and that obviously sucks but it might mean that they have to stop working when they're 50. It might mean they're not able to provide for your family. A number of these possible reasons. Now, the last big thing I want to bring up here is family. Most people in the world have a strong desire to have children and family, both because it provides them with a sense of legacy and because there is really strong evolutionarily inbuilt biological drives for us to want children. However, having children is fucking hard. And like raising a couple of children means you have like a significant logistical and financial and emotional burden in your life for the next 20 years. This is something that becomes exponentially harder to do when you're with a partner who cannot be relied to share, to like take on their share of the burden in raising those children. I'll now take Naomi.
Yeah, so when it comes to emotional stability, how are you going to fall in love with someone in the first place if you're not emotionally compatible with them whatsoever?
Yes, so right. This is a burden we're happily willing to take. I think the two answers here is A, we don't think you need to fall in love with them immediately. We think like it's fine, like you can live with people in as at least in a roommate type situation who you aren't immediately in love with, and we think this is something that can come over time. But even then, look, like if you just have to have sex with them a couple of times, to have like children and live in a stable partnership that is cooperative between the two of you, I don't even think that would be the worst thing. However, why do we think that you will still likely get some amount of love under our side, even if you don't marry for it? Because A, we think that love is mostly a factor of emotional intimacy between you and a person and the amount of time that you spend together. E.g., if you spend a lot of time together, you will gain a lot of familiarity and trust between each other because you like take on life's challenges together. You will develop little silly in-jokes. You will know a lot about your partner, about their weaknesses, about their strengths. And in that process of overcoming life together, you learn to admire them. You learn to see the strengths in what they do, the beauty in how they compose themselves, all the little challenges that they overcome. We think this in itself will make the time spent together special and will likely cultivate something akin to love over time. But even then, humans are animals and we can condition ourselves into a lot of shit. Anyway, look, go utility, love is overrated. I hate debating. Bye.
I want to thank that speaker for his speech. I'd like to remind everyone we're not going to write after 7 minutes 15, so do try to finish in time. That being said, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker of opening up session. Here.
Okay, great. For my speech, if you have POIs, I would also prefer if you just offered them in the chat. There is a reason that most CEOs are horribly miserable and most people who are in love are happy. Money and utility does not create meaning, but relationships can. I'm going to do a few things in this speech. Firstly, thoroughly respond to the PM and then advance 2 claims. Number 1, why people are actively good at selecting for long-term passion in love. And number 2, why we get substantially more fulfilling relationships. Firstly, I have a lot of rebuttal. I want to start by responding to their emotional stability claim. My first response to this is that you often need a baseline degree of emotional stability to fall in love with someone in the first place. Because often what love is at its core is the ability to feel safe with someone, to feel fully understood when you are in their arms. And if you can't communicate properly, if they can't understand you, you are less likely to develop feelings of love in the first place. But secondly, even if you have the baseline degree of emotional disconnect, when you love someone, you're often willing to work through and to resolve those problems because you want them to be happy, because you have their best interest at heart. So therefore, you might put up a front, even if it's hard for you, to do things like become more patient within arguments. On their claim that quality of life is important, especially if you're poor within India. Look, we don't need to defend marrying people in abject poverty under our side of a house. Like, usually you marry people within your own income bracket, meaning that most people can afford things like very emergency type surgeries. I also don't think that they can say that marrying for utility means that you're going to be able to find a sugar daddy, because usually rich people like to marry other rich people within their brackets because it's often more accepted by their families overall and it's associated with higher degrees of prestige. So maybe you can marry someone who's slightly financially better off, but I think that what they have to defend are utility that exists beyond the realms of economics. Things like similar interests, things like similar religions, being accepted by family, stuff like that. They cannot just have this debate about money. My next response under utility, though, is that utility has a capacity to change over time. Even if we accept where OG wants to like pigeonhole this debate about money, people who are well off economically can lose their jobs. Automation is a massive risk. There are economic shifts. There's economic recessions. A lot of people became poor during 2008. And I think that a lot of other aspects of utility change a lot as well. Because what utility is fundamentally based on are your interests at a particular subset in time. Do I want kids when I'm 25? What religion do I want to be when I'm 25? Often these things change because our preference change in accordance with new people that we meet, new areas that we travel to. Maybe you thought that you wanted to live on a certain continent, but you go on vacation and then you realize that you actually really want to live somewhere else. So I actually think that mirroring on utility is extremely unstable in informing long-term preferences. Finally, on their claim that you can fall in love over time. This is literally Stockholm Syndrome. I have many close friends, and I'm not in love with any of them. This is ridiculous, right? I'm not clear why you're likely to see the things that your partner does positively. Like often relationships have long-term stressors, so you're not going to appreciate their beautiful smile. You're going to get annoyed with them for chewing with their mouth open and not fall in love. And I think at best, this often just means that you become like, maybe you can develop a friendship, but this is a lot less meaningful than falling in love with someone. Why do we think that people are good at selecting for love under our side of the house? Firstly, people know that marrying is a very big decision, so you spend a lot of time thinking about it, and you're not just going to marry someone who is hot. Secondly, your friends and family care about utility to a large extent, so they can push for this as a counterbalancing mechanism and question potential red flags, such that you're not just blinded by love. Thirdly, norms in the vast majority of states are no longer like you date for 2 weeks and then you get married. Often people date for years, even in developing countries, before proposing. What this means is that yes, you care about love and passion, but you're also caring for a baseline degree of compatibility as well. Fourthly, love is not just looks, but it's emotional intimacy as well. When we think that someone's hot, we hook up with them. But love is a lot deeper, and it does factor in for emotional considerations as well, right? It's about like finding beauty in someone else's laugh, feeling at home when someone else holds you. These are things that don't just change as you age and as you get uglier, because it's small things about someone that you appreciate. And even some physical traits about someone, like really loving the color of their eyes or liking their style and how they dress, do not change as you age, even when you wrinkle and even when you get less hot. Why then do we think that people are way happier in relationships under our side of the house? Firstly, your sex life is just substantially better. It's much better to continually have sex with someone that you are actually attracted to and that you're probably less insecure in front of because you know that you love them completely. So you just have way more fulfilling sex for the entirety of your life. And if you're not actually in love with someone, you are way more likely to cheat and your partner is way more likely to cheat, inspiring feelings of insecurity and also guilt if you were cheating on someone else. Secondly, it is about a daily feeling of being in love, which is just extremely powerful. Sure, the honeymoon phase ends and maybe your heart is not going to race every time you see your partner, but a baseline level of love can still extend beyond the honeymoon phase when you are cuddling each other every single night, when you are watching the movies that you did when you ultimately fell in love. This feeling is powerful because it's just daily dopamine and fun that you actually feel excited when your partner comes home from work and kisses you on the cheek, but it's also very validating. It's that this person chose you because they were attracted to you, because they loved you. Again, rather than any other fish in the pond and rather than anyone else in the world. The ability to feel loved by someone else is a very confidence-inducing feeling, and it doesn't exist the same when you marry on utility, because it's like, oh, you just fulfilled the other end of their contract. Thirdly, hard times are more likely to be sustainable, but before I explain this, just back up, have a POI. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I tried to engage. On the question of hard times, when you love someone, you're going to be a lot more likely to stay with them during periods of hard times. During life, there's a lot of really rough periods that happen. Maybe one of you will get cancer, parents pass away, and people experience degrees of grief. When these hard times happen, often a relationship that is built on the grounds of utility will fall apart because your mental health is really bad. Maybe you're not as emotionally stable. Maybe you need to take some time off your job because you're experiencing degrees of depression. Often what keeps people in these times with you and not leaving you and being emotionally present for you is the fact that they love you on such a deep foundational level that they don't want you to experience any degree of hurt. Note, having people stay with you in these times is something that is extremely important because this is often when you are the most desperate for a support system. You crave someone else, and even preemptively, the feeling of security that the person is not going to leave you. This is not only about staying together during like external hard times like cancer, but it's also about things like frequent argumentation that can happen under either side of a house. You're going to be a lot more willing to do things like work through arguments when you value someone else to a massive extent, when you are a massive simp, when you are actually in love with them, and you want to resolve these things to a large extent. Finally, you're likely to hugely feel like you are missing out on the other side of a house, because this debate is taking place in a world where the vast majority of people, aside from some niche communities in developing countries that have arranged marriages, everyone else around you is marrying for love. And sure, we're not going to claim that every relationship that's built on love is perfect, but you are going to see a lot of people around you who are passionately happy, right? It's that feeling when you see an 80-year-old couple at the airport embracing, when you see your friends talking about how much they love their partner and how hot they are, and you feel like you are missing out because you have been the one actor who has chosen to marry on another basis, and therefore you're missing out on a core pinnacle of the human experience.
I would like to thank that speaker for his speech. I'd like to give the floor to the second speaker of opening government here.
Great. I'll take POIs in the chat, please. Thank you. Firstly, I'm going to talk about conflict and why that's worse than op. Secondly, I'll explain why love is fleeting. Thirdly, I'll talk about why utility is better. On conflict, there are 3 reasons I want to forward as to why conflict is worse with marriages for love. The first is that there's more potential conflict when you marry for passion, and thus more potential for your marriage to fall apart. So love can't fix everything. This is just because there are more incompatibilities that you're unlikely to address in the first parts of your relationship because you're in love. You haven't taken the time necessarily to dissect all of your goals or how you'll move forward as a couple, and you overlook these incompatibilities because you think, as long as I love this person, it'll be fine. This looks like talking about children. It looks like talking about things like financial stress in the future and how you'll navigate balancing incomes or splitting the household bills. All of these things are things that create lots of conflict. They're things that are more likely to be addressed on our side. Secondly, people are going to be more committed to resolve conflicts when they marry for utility rather than love. And this is exactly the opposite of what Naomi says. But the reasoning for this is that because if a relationship is dependent on you feeling love or passion for another person, sometimes that passion isn't going to be there. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you fall out of love permanently with the other person. But for example, sometimes when you're having fights, when you're going through a rough time emotionally, you just don't feel that love and passion anymore. The issue here is that this makes you incredibly likely to distance yourself from your partner. For example, maybe you feel more of a spark with someone else. Maybe if your relationship is just founded on love and you're not feeling it, you panic and want to leave. The issue, the comparative then, is that utility is based on the narrative of building a life with someone. So you're more likely to focus on dialogue, like here's how we can work towards our shared goals. Finally, relationships through utility lead to more rational conflict resolution. And this is because a lot of the discourse that's surrounding love are things like love endures through all, or that you can fix someone through love. And people expect that love can solve their problems. But this leads to really shit things, like when couples have kids to fix the relationship because they think that once they have kids, it'll reignite the spark that they once had. Instead of trying to reignite the spark that's often fickle and isn't there, when you focus on utility, you focus on less emotional solutions, more concrete solutions that allow both of you to move forward. So that's why relationships are better. Let's talk about why love is fleeting. So a couple of reasons why this is true. The first thing is that there are lots of things that we think that are love that are actually hormones. And sure, a lot of this is centered in the first couple of months of your relationship in terms of the honeymoon period, but also things like your sex drive will decrease as you get older after you get married, things like menopause or hormonal changes, which means that the foundations of your relationship often aren't there later on. And even if you're passionate, well, you're not having sex anymore, and people often get quite disillusioned by that. Secondly, your interests and your passions change, and Naomi agrees with this, but think about all of the friends that you've had and how many friends that you've drifted apart with. That doesn't magically change once you're in a relationship with a significant other. Sometimes you feel that there just isn't anything to talk about anymore, and just because you've loved your partner once doesn't mean that you can fix the fact that there isn't that much more common ground. Thirdly, marriage is a new environment. So even if I date someone for years before we get married, there are still lots of obstacles that happen after you get married that you can't prepare for, that couples that are just deeply in love with each other sometimes don't talk about. So sometimes for some couples, marriage is the first time they live together. For others, it's the first time they're introduced to new environments, like taking care of their children, things like career struggles, things like accidents that come up. You can't prepare for these things. And so as Sam says, you should prioritize qualities like having the money to ensure yourself through these struggles, having the emotional stability and the communication skills with your partner, where you prioritize for utility and somebody who will work through these things rationally with you. Finally, love can often die out because it breeds resentment. So look at the very classic example of a woman who gives up her job for her husband because she loves him so much, but then resents him later on because now she's given up her career. Like, these things happen very often. Even if I love someone and I'm willing to do very much for them because I care about them very much, that doesn't mean I'm not going to harbor resentment. So Naomi says, you won't just marry someone who's hot. We agree. But the fact that I like cuddling isn't going to fix the fact that love can disappear and love can often derail our lives. This is important because I've then explained why it's more likely your relationship will end when you marry for love. People panic when they feel themselves falling out of love because they think their partner is the one at the beginning. But once these feelings begin to die out, they think that somebody else must be the one. I'm not in the relationship that's for me. And you start thinking that you maybe aren't as compatible as you once thought. This is why 50% of marriages end in divorce in the United States, where most people think they're marrying for love. On the other hand, when you focus on utility and building a life with someone, that's likely to create a more stable and long-term relationship. Before I talk about why utility is better, closing.
Given that people have the capacity and the craving to give love, who are they going to give that love to if not to their husband or wife?
To your friends, to your family. Like, if your husband is the only person you love in your life, I think it's a very sad life. Let's then talk about why utility is better. So a couple of reasons here. Firstly, economic security matters a lot more to most people than emotional compatibility. Like, they try to pigeonhole this example as like abject poverty in India. No, it's like the single mom in Chicago who would probably be better off being able to like send her kids to decent schools and put food on the table consistently than marrying somebody who she feels like she loves. Like, the average American has less than $1,000 in savings. That's less than one emergency. Like, these people probably care more about being able to pay their hospital bills than feeling some sort of abstract feelings of passion towards another person. Secondly, utility is less likely to change. So Naomi is completely correct. Like, sometimes you lose your job, but think about how many times you've been attracted to a new person and how many times you've changed your hobbies compared to like the number of times that you've lost your job in your life. But also there are lots of factors like your child preferences, your emotional stability, your character traits, your religion. These things don't tend to change throughout your life. So utility is far less fickle. The third thing is that people can fall in love. Now, Naomi says that like she doesn't feel feelings of love for her friends. I guess not in the sense of like romantic love, but I think people love their friends in many ways. And so you can grow to love the person that you marry for utility, even if you're not lusting after them every day. Like, I'd be very happy if I married my best friend, because even if I don't want to have sex with her at every second, like, I'd be very happy building a life with them. And that's the point we're trying to make. You don't need love to lead a fulfilled life. The final thing is that leaving the relationship is far more painful when you marry for love rather than utility. That's because when people pin their identities to the person that they believe is the one, and that relationship ends for whatever reason, they feel like they're completely unlovable. They feel like something about their identity is wrong or something about themselves is wrong. On the other hand, marriages for utility are focused more on practicality. So when that relationship falls apart, you just think, like, maybe I just need to marry someone with other priorities, or the goals that we had in life didn't quite work out. And it isn't an attack on you or how much love you gave or how good of a person you are. It's just a matter of maybe you didn't get on with the other person as well as you could have with someone else. On this basis, I'm very proud to propose.
I would like to thank that speaker for its speech. And I would like to give the floor to the second speaker of opening opposition to close the opening half. Here.
Can everyone hear me? Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Several things in the speech. Firstly, why you have to have a choice for this debate to function. Secondly, the foundations of love and why those endure and why you need love to live a fulfilling life. And finally, dealing with conflict. Firstly, I think that the frame that opening government tries to push on us, where they say, you marry someone, this is useful if you have $1,000 in savings and are like a catastrophe away from abject poverty, is ultimately very restrictive, right? I think at the point where you don't have a choice and at the point where you either have to marry or you're going to be cast into poverty, I think you were probably screwed. I don't think that you have the choice of marrying for love or passion at this point in time. If there's genuinely a choice between being able to access adequate healthcare or being able to access food. Moving on to the foundations of love. Look, why is love likely something that endures? Because I think a lot of what we get from opening opposition is that, look, love is unlikely to endure. You probably fall out of love with someone, their body changes in ways that are odd or scary, and as a consequence, you're likely to feel less in love with them. Firstly, I think you just, like, most love is based off of a strong emotional connection. You want to be loved by someone else. You grow up surrounded by narratives about how love is important. You grow up with watching your parents fall in love and watching your parents cuddle each other on the couch. You grow up watching movies that glorify love and talk about how it is an amazing thing. You watch all of your friends be in relationships and realize that it might be a genuinely wonderful thing. You see them work through their problems and think that this is something that you want. I think ultimately the world that we live in conditions us to want to love and be loved in return. As a consequence, I think this is fairly fulfilling insofar as this something that you were told you want from the moment you were born to the day that you die. Therefore, I think you seek out someone with whom you have an emotional connection. I don't think that you marry someone who you've been on 1 or 2 Tinder dates with, or someone who you think is kind of attractive but who bores you. Because I think that if you have to spend the rest of your life with that person, you don't want to spend the rest of your life with someone who you find dull. You don't want to spend the rest of your life chained to someone who you cannot stand, or who you cannot hold a conversation with, or who you see in the kitchen every morning and wonder, who is the stranger that I married? As a consequence, I think most relationships are built off a strong emotional foundation, insofar as is what most people want and what most people find fulfilling over an extended period of time, when you have to interact with this person every single day, when you go on multiple different dates with them, when you live with them for 2 years before deciding to get married. I think you have a strong emotional foundation for that love. Secondly, though, I think you just get used to each other's changing bodies as you age. We point out, firstly, that there are some things that don't change over time. The color of your eyes, your laugh, the way that you talk, but even then, right, your body changes as well as the other person's. You watch each other's bodies change, you get used to it, right? I never noticed my mother aging, because in my mind it was always my mother, even though it was a span of 10 years, because when you spend every single day with someone for an extended period of time, you don't notice tiny things like aging until you step back and think, well, we were really attractive back then. But I think that because it happens to you as well, you feel less insecure about it. You don't think, oh, well, maybe they love me less because I'm less attractive, because you realize that they are in the same position. As a consequence, I think you get used to your changing bodies. You probably laugh about it. You probably tell each other jokes about it, and you probably still love each other no less over time. Finally, though, I think you're likely to just become a better person throughout the process of the relationship. I think you want to improve yourself constantly. You want to be a better person. You want to be a kinder person. You want to be someone who is more deserving of the love that the other individual gives you. Thus, I think that you are likely to improve yourself over an extended period of time, contrary to what opening opposition say, because you want to be someone who is worthy of love, and you want to be someone who who gets to receive that care. You don't want the relationship to end. That is a cost that you cannot fathom. Your finances are often intertwined. You live in the same house. I think therefore you want the person who you marry to be someone who you genuinely love. As a consequence, I think we show you why love endures. Comparatively, financial situations or utility are unlikely to endure. Individuals' hobbies change as they find new things to move on. You've played every single video game. You probably don't want to play another one. The economy changes. The labor market gets worse. Therefore, it's harder for you to get a job. Someone suffers some kind of catastrophe that wipes out their entire savings account. Someone's family member dies and they are suddenly no longer the same person. I think these shocks happen all of the time. It is very difficult to select for stability, whereas it is a lot easier to select for love and a lot easier to select for passion, insofar as you know yourself and you know what your needs are. Therefore, we give you a more certain benefit than opening government give you. Next, on to conflict. The first thing we hear is that, you are unlikely to address concerns like income and the amount of children that you have prior to entering a marriage. I would posit that this is insane, right? People sit down and talk about these things before they get married. People don't rush into marriage with someone who they've never spoken to. People are with someone that they've never spoken to. You probably live together for an extended period of time to kind of trial run, is it all right to live with one another? Can we stand each other? Can we be in the living room at the same time and not have to talk all of the time? You probably discuss how many children you want to have, given that this is a fairly big deal breaker for most couples, especially as we are normalizing having fewer children. You probably just spend an extended period of time with someone. I think these sorts of things come up. This sort of conversation comes up prior to engagement. It comes up especially after engagement. Your families are always asking whether or not you're going to have children. At some point in time, you have to address this prior to getting married. Secondly, though, they say, well, you're just likely to distance yourself from your partner at the point where there's a conflict. Look, I think the problem with this is that you don't have something to fight for when you marry based on utility, because it's just an arrangement. You realize, well, if this isn't great right now, I can just move on from it. I can go do something else about my life, or move on to something that's more advantageous. I think on our side of the house, you have something to fight for. You think, I'm going to try and make this work because I do love this person. I know there's someone nice underneath the person who I've been fighting with for the last day. I'll take a POI from opening government.
If love is so enduring, why do 50% of marriages in the US fall apart?
For all the reasons you guys talk about, because people fall into like economic shocks. There are problems. Economic shocks. There are problems that like plague marriages. People have to move away from one another in order to make jobs work. But even then, right, I would say that still 50% of the population is able to select. And look, even if you only get 5 years with someone, even if you got 5 years of love and happiness, and then you have a fight and you divorce yourself, that's 5 years more of like love and contentment that you get on our side of the house that you don't get on yours. I think in opening government, you have to deal with feeling as though you are trapped within a marriage that you can't escape, feeling as unfulfilled when you see everyone else in your life marry and be happy and marry and be happy and move on with their lives, while you're trapped in a marriage that doesn't give you the love that you've been told from the day you're born that you want. I think as a consequence of this, you're likely to feel really unfulfilled. You feel as though there's something within the human condition that you never got access to. I think even on our side of the house, look, even if the marriage fails, even if you get remarried at a later point in time, I think at least on our side of the house, you had something that you loved and you had something that was worth working through your problems with. I've never been prouder to oppose.
Okay, we are fine to go. So let's give the floor to the member of government. Here.
Okay, cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So few points of extraneous rebuttal before getting into our extension. So the first thing that I want to flag is, like, OO saying utilities can change over time, but people can evolve together, and love therefore remains. I think this is symmetric, right? So utilities can change over time because your life circumstances change, but you can also fall out of love. And I would argue one of those things happens way faster than the other, because most people that I know at my age have been through like 2 to 3 different relationships, and not that many have overhauled their complete life plan so far. But what is not symmetric is your ability to plan for that. On our side of the house, when you go into a marriage with the idea of going into it for utility, you already probably have made some exit plan in case those things don't work out as well, which is basically sacrosanct if you're marrying for love and passion, because you're not allowed to think about what happens if your marriage fails. Then they tell us that marriages on utility will fall apart more easily. Look, I don't think either side can really prove that, because there's not a lot of marriages on utility happening right now that we know of. But I think one of those intuition pumps that I have is that if women get sick, they have a massively higher risk of being divorced by their husbands because they don't want to care for their sick wives. These are also people that once swore that they were gonna love your life. So meaning that even if someone loves you, that is not a guarantee that they will if things get hard. Relationships can always break apart on either side of the house. However, on our side of the house, we're opening room for actively expressing those things beforehand and expressing what your kind of like red flags in a relationship would be, and things that you would not be willing to go through, because you don't have this narrative that you need to have a perfect relationship where you need to stick together through thick and thin. Okay, now going into our case, which is OG explains to us that love makes you miserable, or love bad, as they say it, because you make bad choices, because you enter love in a state of hormonal madness. We bring to you that we don't think it is just hormonal madness. I think people pursue, maybe that is what brings you to love, like in the beginning. But I think what brings people to actually then pursue a relationship with a person they fall in love with, without considering whether that is a good thing long term, is that we have massive narratives surrounding love that dictate how you're supposed to feel in a relationship and how you're supposed to engage with each other. Now, what do those narratives look like? So I think the way that they're coming to us through mostly is like movies, TV series, or books. In these narratives, love is presented in several ways. I think one of the most classic stories is that your love is supposed to go through thick and thin. OO tells us that this is a good narrative because it makes you stick together. But that also means that at the point where I feel like this is not going to work out, I'm going to feel really bad about myself. Since we have so many shows and other narratives that present romantic love to me, I also have this feeling that this is something that I need in my life. Otherwise, I'm going to be a failure. This is something that I need in order to feel fulfilled as a human being. I also learned that this love should be unconditionally. I learned that this love should be, that my lover should be worshiping you. I learned that they should be fulfilling my every need. And if they don't, that means that there has to be something crucially, that there has to be something gravely wrong with that relationship, and that I'm not allowed to have a relationship break apart. Now, how do those narratives affect me? They affect me in a way that I believe I need love to be fulfilled. It becomes a motivator for me to find this love, whatever the costs. Meaning at this point, crucially, because of the narrative, you're much more likely to buy into relationships that you probably wouldn't have bought into in the first place. Because the desire, the social desire to be seen as someone who has a relationship and has made it as part of their life motivates you to take conditions that you probably wouldn't be taking otherwise, to overlook things that you probably wouldn't be overlooking otherwise, even if you were madly in love with this person. But what things like, for example, them having completely different life goals than you, things like, for example, them not like having the same education background as you, things like them, for example, wanting to move to a different country and you not wanting that. Okay, now how does this affect me in my day-to-day life? Because what OG gives us here is that, maybe you're going to have more conflicts, but we don't even have to go that hard. We think even if you don't have conflicts in romantic relationships and manage to preserve the relationship, we think your experience within this relationship is going to be much worse because you're going to constantly beat yourself up about not being happy. Now, what does this look like? So in the beginning of the relationship, you're, as Ochi says, you're like in this honeymoon phase, and you're going to buy into those things that you're not really sure about, or you're not going to see these flaws. Now, at the point where those narratives kick in, you probably have been within this relationship for a little bit longer. And at that point, you're going to recognize like minuscule things that tick you off. Things like, for example, your partner snores. Things like, for example, your partner gained weight. Things, for example, like your partner spends all day playing Diablo 4 and doesn't engage with you. Those are all things that are not really big things within your relationship, but those are things that can annoy the living shit out of you because they accumulate day over day over day. You're spending every day with this person, meaning you're constantly going to engage with those things. On our side of the house, we think it is much easier to deal with those things because you can make an active trade-off of whether you want these things or not, because you never entered this relationship with the idea that it needs to work under all circumstances and that you need this person to be fulfilled and happy. You can be honest with yourself that those things piss you off and can address them in order to alleviate them. Before going on, I'm taking CO. Or OO.
Sorry.
Minor annoyances. Minor annoyances are likely to happen in any relationship. Who are you more likely to raise these to? Someone who you trust, who you feel knows you, and who you have a good relationship with, or someone who you are effectively within a contract with?
Okay, so two things. First of all, having a good relationship and trusting each other is not mutually exclusive, right? You can trust and like and have a good relationship with a person on both sides of the house. But I think I'm crucially more likely to voice these things when I don't think that the entire relationship is staked on them. I think it's not even as much, we're not even at the point of voicing those things. I think we're just at the point of admitting to myself that there's things about my partner that I do not like, because on your part of the house, you're going to be so engaged within those narratives that your lover needs to fulfill all of those things and needs to make you happy, that you're not even engaging with the fact that those minuscule things tick you off, which is why they're more easily resolved on our side of the house. Even if it doesn't work on our side of the house, the trade-off is much easier because you never went into this idea with the idea that it needs to work under all circumstances. Now, why is, like utility marriage is better on our side of the house? Because I think you're going to have more openness from the get-go. I think one of the crucial things is that on our side of the house, you're also going to be much more aware of those goals. If you go into a marriage with the idea, or into dating with the idea that you want to marry for utility, you're going to be aware of your own goals, which you might not be on op side of the house, because realistically, lots of people rush into marriages without thinking about those things on your side of the house. Why is this important? Because those are crucial for long-term happiness. We also, I'm running out of time. Very proud to propose.
I would like to thank that speaker for his speech, and I would like to give the floor to the first speaker of closing up session here.
Oh, no. Okay, am I audible? Cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. O tells us why these relationships are going to be good and are going to last. We will tell you specifically why when you marry out of utility, no matter how long this relationship lasts, it's going to feel terrible. It's going to have a horrible impact on you. It's never going to be able to give you the same satisfaction and the same sort of acceptance that you need in your life, and why this is only possible when you marry out of love, and why this is the biggest existential fulfillment that you can have. Seeded framing, by the way, is wrong because people know that they're nuisances. You've seen it with your parents, and you know the divorce rate probably that OG also knows. So you probably like go into relationships knowing that like your partner's right? What brings you happiness? I think happiness is based on how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you. Meaning that you need to see yourself as human, and you need to see yourself as being accepted, and as feeling like you're worth something, and as being supported. Because in order to realize that I exist, and in order to realize that I as an existing human matter, and that I as an existing human am okay the way I am, means that I need to voice myself to people. I need to like explain to someone else that I'm feeling intrusive thoughts, that maybe my life is not going like perfectly, and I need to feel accepted in that, because only then will I feel safe, and will I feel like this is basically the biggest metric that I need in life. I also want to see myself as a good person, right? I want to not hurt people on either side of the house, even if I don't love them, because that means I'm probably some kind of dirtbag, which is horrible because I can't look myself in the face anymore. You also want other people to feel happy, even if they don't make you feel happy in the same way. The intention comes is you give your friend a present, even and want to pick the best present, even if it's not like the closest friend, because you're happy when you see themselves opening the present and being happy. When you have sex with someone, even if it's a hookup, you feel good, you feel a pleasure through seeing that the other person is also enjoying themselves. This isn't necessarily based on love, but you still want other people to like you. First piece of extension, why when you marry out utility, it will not be a positive experience. There's two like strands of things that can happen. If the other person loves you, you will feel eternally guilty, right? Because you have probably loved before. This is probably not your first relationship when you get married. You have probably like tried out different things, right? Which means that you know what it's like to love. You know what it's like to give everything to the other person, and you know, and you see this other person that you live with forever, that you have had a relationship for such a long time, giving everything to you, trying to make you as happy as possible, because that's what makes them happy, doing everything they can, and you cannot give it back the same way. You cannot give it with the same passion, and you cannot give it with the same enjoyment that you could if you were in love. You feel guilty because that you're not giving that person what they reasonably deserve, which you probably care for them to some extent when you've lived together for a long time, but you will never be able to feel the same kind of thing that they do, and that makes you feel bad because that's not something you can give them back. But also you feel terribly guilty because you know that you could give that love to someone else. You know that you are like you like can do it, but you cannot do it with that person. If the other person is also in it for utility, this is probably even worse, because this affects not only your relationship with that person, but also the relationships around you. Because probably, like reasonably, when you marry for utility, probably at some point, no one has said like, I love you. Probably at some point, yeah, you're also in it for money. Yeah, okay, cool. Let's get married. But even if you don't do it, probably can infer from, because you feel a certain way, probably the other person also feels a certain way, because you like don't have epistemic access to something, and you like base what you perceive other people to do on your own experience, right? So the problem here is you know that you have opted into this on the basis of utility. Utility is probably not just, I have this one job, it's probably like total package, right? Because you have to live together, this has to be like util the whole way around. But even if it's only that one job, the things, everything in yourself interacts with each other. Meaning that when I get sick, when I have intrusive thoughts, when I'm not the same person anymore, this also affects how I will do at my job, right? This means you know you're in it for the utility, and you cannot you cannot fulfill your end of the bargain anymore if you tell that to the other person, because you know the other person will only stick with you, and if you tell to them, because that is the metric you agreed upon, as like people say, right? So that means you will not be able to open up to the same extent to them as you do to other people. You will not be able to tell them the same things, because you're always worried about what will they think of me. Will they not like accept me anymore for who I am, because the basis where I have a disagreement on is specifically utility, and I do not fulfill my end of the bargain anymore. This also makes you extremely paranoid, because probably you have a social circle, right? You have friends who also talk to your partner and shit like that. If you tell anyone else there's always the fear that this might impact your relationship in a way that is never salvageable, because like you have intrusive thoughts, or you're going through a really, really rough patch or something, and this is like something that affects your general utility. This means that you will also mask towards other people, and you have no one else to tell the deepest, darkest fears that you have in your life. And also you will feel guilt because you do not fulfill your end of the bargain, which is like the metric you've agreed upon. But what happens if you marry out of love? I think when you marry out of love, you assume the other person also marries out of love because of the inference and because of like a sort of self-protection mechanism of like, I want to think that the other person also loves me. Even if the other person doesn't love me, though, I can still give that sort of love. This is the most important thing, because giving love means I can support them. I can be behind them no matter what. I can make them feel happy. I can make them lean on myself, and I can know that they can come to me for support, and that I can support this person, and I can care for them no matter what. Before I go on, OG.
Sure, on our side, you might struggle with attraction at times, but you can also pay your medical bills and raise a family in the way that you dream of. Is that not clearly better than just having a bit of love?
No, because I've explained to you that like you have no one to tell your deepest, darkest fears, right? Even if you're like rich and happy in other ways, you cannot tell anyone, which means that like you don't fulfill the deepest thing that you need. You're also more likely to open up to the person that you love because you want and feel like they will never judge you. You tell them the stuff you would never tell anyone otherwise. Your friends are not always around. You don't need to have that sort of intimacy with your friends if it's like uncomfortable to tell them that someone in your family is sick or that you have like horrible thoughts, right? This is difficult. It's difficult to love someone, meaning that it's very precious, meaning that this is the only way how you can actually achieve this sort of like solvency of having this existential partner, this existential unit with yourself. That means it's the most important thing in your life that you at least can give someone this sort of love, and that you at least can feel like you can open up to someone, even if they might not love you, but you get the satisfaction of helping someone else and of being able to speak who you truly are. Never been prouder to.
I would like to thank that speaker for speech. I'd like to give the floor to the last speaker of closing government and the government as a whole. Here.
1 second. Okay, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. So, the biggest lie I've ever heard is if he wanted to, he would. This is a narrative that is continuously perpetuated on the internet that I myself believed for a while, that I know a lot of my friends believe, because it's so easy to want the kind of love you see in the movies. That if he wanted to, he would. That if he really cared about me, then he would do this and that, and he wouldn't do this and that. And I think we need to understand how deeply troubling these narratives can be in relationships. And I think my partner Mira has explained this to you very well. And I think this takes away a lot of the benefits that both CO and OO have brought up for us, right? Like CO has just told us that once you have this love, you know that you can open up to them, you know you can support, you know they will support you, you know they will do exactly like what you need. But how does the situation change when this is somebody who you think you love? You think, well, if he wanted to, he would ask me how I am. If he wanted to, he would care about me, just because he does not like have your partner doesn't have the initiative to ask you about these things. Essentially, I think there's a lot of reasons why you're not communicative and not open when you're in love. And I think these are very well explained by these narratives, but also the fact that I think Mira has explained to you why falling out of love and falling out of utility is symmetric. And that falls in there. That is where the entirety of CO's case falls off, right? Because at the point where I'm just as likely to lose utility as I am to lose love, then there's just as good of a chance that when I open up to my partner, or I think I can open up to my partner, I realize that they don't want to be with me anymore because they don't want to be with someone who has mental issues. They have fallen out of love with me. They don't like the person I have become, and they're going to leave me. We think these are both extremely likely on both sides of the house. And I think like government side has already told you a million or more reasons why love falls apart. And I think we have made the most important addition to this because our mechanisms don't just rely on like all of these like theoretical things, right? Like our opening tells us a lot of different reasons why one could potentially fall out of love. But we think that these at the end of the day, like are not going to be the deciding factors, right? Like maybe you do have like a little problem with incompatibility, but you believe in this idea of love, and the belief in this narrative is exactly what makes these relationships fall apart, because technically all of the things that have been brought up by our opening can be solved, but the reason they cannot be solved is because of these narratives that are actively acting as an obstacle to having these honest and deep conversations, because you have unrealistic expectations of what love looks like. We think this is the most detrimental thing in this debate. So moving on to some responses, starting with CO. So CO has told us that the most important thing is how you perceive yourself and for you to feel supported and like feel like you're in a good environment. And we also think, and they also told us that you don't want to hurt people. So on the first scenario that they give us, that the other person loves you, but you don't love them, I don't understand why you cannot get fulfillment from showing this person love. Like, for instance, when my friend broke up with her like 2-year-long boyfriend, I was showing up at her house. I was bringing her flowers. I was writing her notes. I was doing everything that a partner is meant to do for you, not because I am romantically in love with my friend, but I knew that she needed to be shown love. And I think this is extremely important, right? Like, this is how I can show somebody love even without being in love with them and wanting to like be with them in a sexual manner or in a loving manner, but also in a friendship manner. And I can get a lot of fulfillment from that. And my partner is also likely going to get fulfillment from that, because look, I'm just assuming that if you marry for convenience, you have communicated this to your partner. So we can assume that your partner knows that you've married for utility and not for love. Otherwise, like, you're a bad person for not communicating that. But yeah, and I think at the point where we get both for utility, I think their framing is a bit like uncharitable, because marriages for utility have been happening across the world for like hundreds of years, right? This looks like arranged marriages that happen because, you know, certain people, certain families will get advantages out of it, or because deals have been made at birth to marry these two children. These are also situations where like people are put in a situation where they are marrying not out of love, but literally out of utility to themselves or for their parents. And we've seen plenty of these relationships. They're not just about the utility as soon as you've built up a life together, right? It's about the fact that even when your utility decreases at a certain point, you still put in that work into the relationship because of the utility. So it's not just suddenly all gone because you are no longer useful, but it's all the work that you built up is still there, right? And we think also, even if your partner does decide to leave you, we don't see why you would care about this loss very much, right? Because like Theo frames this like, oh, you will be on the floor, somebody has just left you because you're no longer useful to them. But it's like, at the point where you marry for convenience, probably like, you know, you wanted this too. So we don't see why this would be like such an like exponential loss for you. Okay, and even let's say like maybe you fell in love with this person and they didn't fall in love with you back. We think this is pretty symmetric on both sides of the house. Like, this can happen whether you marry for utility or not. So we don't see why this is relevant. Now, some responses to opening. They spend a good amount of time telling us why people are good at selecting partners. Here's some reasons why they aren't. Because a lot of the time you're pressured to marry at a specific point in your life, right? Especially when you enter your late 20s, actually, before I finish this, I'll take a POI from opening.
Yeah, so on our side, you don't have to gamble and hope that the person who you wind up marrying is someone who is tolerable, because you get all of the love and all of the passion that we tell you get. You don't have to wait 5 years to build it up and pray that it occurs.
This is great. So why are we assuming that dating doesn't exist in a world where you're marrying for utility? Why do you have to like never have met this person? I can date for utility as well, right? Like, even if I'm married for utility, I'm assuming I still get to like go on 5 dates, see if this person is tolerable. I'm not going to marry someone I hate. I don't think that's part of the motion for marrying for utility. I think it simply states that my top priority is utility and I'm not looking to find love, right? And I think that can be achieved even with like getting to know this person like like for a while and making sure that we're not going to hate each other. So moving on to why you're not good at selecting, right? Because it's at a certain point in your time, right? Usually like in a span of like from when you're 25 to 35, you're expected to be married in this time. So often what happens is that you're just stuck with the person that you happen to be with at that point in your life. And we don't think that's in any way some sort of like lasting love. Also, we think that you can also have open relationships, right? And still get all of the like happiness of sex. And we think these are more likely to happen at the point where you're both marrying for utility and want that sexual pleasure. So what have we brought you uniquely to this debate? We've told you that the reasons why you like love marriages specifically fail is because of the narrative of love, and not even because of all of these problems that exist on both sides of the house. We think the lack of narratives surrounding marriages for utility means that we're much more likely to have a cooperative, open relationship. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for speech. I'd like to give the floor to the last speaker of opposition and closing opposition here.
Alrighty. Three, two, one. I'm going to do a lot of weighing in this debate because I think that there's been a lot of reasons why you might choose one or the other. But I think it is Paula who actually gives you a coverage of all scenarios that could happen to you, whether the other person loves you or not, and or whether the other person is in for the utility. And I think this already wins the debate outright because it doesn't rely on possibility of maybe the other person loves you back, or maybe you love them and they will accept you as you are, as OO puts it, or as Govbench tries to say, you might be easier to leave it, because it relies on a very specific thing that is the most important to human beings, and that is, can I look myself in the mirror? When I see myself every morning, do I feel like a complete person? Do I feel like an imposter? Do I feel like my existence is actually a farce and I'm forcing someone else to be part of that farce as well? I think that given that CAG didn't engage with us, they kind of conceded that point to a great extent to us, but I'm going to engage with that now a little bit more. First, on when you leave and whether you're able to leave. I think that what CG tells us, it's easier to leave when you are in for the utility, but this doesn't engage with what Paula explains to you. The first thing is that it depends on what kind of relationship you're in, right? If the other person loves you and you're everything to that person, and you know that, you feel that because they're always going the extra mile, you're going to feel incredibly guilty, crushing their dreams of what they think that you are for them. The one shoulder to lean on, the one person that they rely on, the one person that they can give all the love to, meaning that you are actually afraid of what might happen to them. But not only that, the hurt you will impose on them, meaning that you're going to stay in it just a little bit longer, just wait it out a little bit longer, because maybe you're going to be able to wait it out. The second thing is when it is about utility. I think both OG and CG and OO underestimate the stress and the existential crisis you go through when both of you are in it for utility. OG PYs us and says, well, at least you can pay your medical bills. One is realize that you're actually going to tell your partner that you're sick. In a relationship where you're both in it for the utility, I think you underestimate the excruciating process of every day weighing yourself and what you bring to the relationship on a scale and whether it is good for your partner or not. People are most cruel to themselves when they look themselves in the mirror, or when they think about themselves. They oftentimes notice the most the dirtiest and the most awful things about themselves, and they're most likely to think that this is something that the relationship might not withhold, even if your partner would have actually accepted you for that, or even if that wouldn't have been a problem for them. You're less likely to share this with your partner because you are afraid of what they might think your utility is in the relationship. The second thing is, it is not guaranteed, because you see love as one of the guarantees of what they're going to do for you, or that they're going to stick with you. Utility might not be it. The third point is when it comes to weighing against OG and also a gov bench. Where is my paper? There we go. Here we go. I think OO tells us why you're good at making good choices. I think that OG and CG give good rebuttal on why this is also possible on either side. I think on both sides of the house, you're going to make somewhat choices that somewhat are according to your preference at that point in time. I think that both sides also prove that both things can end. So what is the most important then? If both sides show you that it can end, it can't be just that Naomi maybe gave like 2 reasons more than Mira. It must be something more substantial. There must be a metric that other teams have not considered. And I think it is this. It is the process of being in the relationship. What happens during the relationship? Meaning that how do you feel when you look at it? And how do you feel retrospectively of what you have done within that relationship? And I think there, regret, as OO frames it, is not the main factor. I think it is guilt. And I want to note the main factor that is differentiating guilt and regret. It is when you're guilty of something, you're imposing an active harm on another person. Meaning, the thing that you're doing to yourself, even if both of them are in for the utility, the questioning on whether I can tell my partner, whether their partner is probably also thinking, will they stick with me if I'm not as utile as maybe my partner wants me to? But worse, even if you're in love, you're guilty of basically abusing their power to love you. You are abusing their power to stick with you, even when you're taking something from them that is not, giving something to them that is not love. Meaning that you are actively an offender in this situation. You are someone who's not just regretting something that might have happened. You're actively engaging in harming another person, and you have to live with that every moment of the relationship. Every moment when you wake up and you see the other person, whether or not you're in scenario A or B. Before I continue, OG.
So what's worse, not loving someone back or marrying someone who you think is the love of your life and then seeing them fall out of love with you?
I think that the process of falling out of love is usually one that is gradual. You probably don't just wake up and don't love the person anymore. Secondly, I think that, meaning that it is not just like, oh, it doesn't happen anymore. And secondly, I think you already grow up with the narrative that love can also end. And I think you've proven that to us, that love can end, and people understand that love can end. So I think that, thank you for proving our point. Then, on existential stress and potential loss, I think that when it comes to potential loss and what happens around, sharing less with your family and your friends because you're afraid that your utility might shrink, or not even telling them what you're in it for the relationship because you're afraid of their judgment, mitigates all of Gov points on how helpful they are to their friends and to what extent, because you don't know what your friend is feeling. You don't know that your friend is in trouble because you're afraid of because they're afraid of telling you in the first place, meaning that Adora would not have had the information completely on why it is that their friend is feeling shitty. And secondly, I would note that given that we're able to love, and given that we want to give this love to someone, and given that the love we've experienced this strongly is only from our parents, and they might leave us one day, and probably before us, it is probably the most fulfilling thing to have a partner by your side to share this. Very proud to oppose.
I want to thank the speaker for his speech and everybody for a great debate. I think the best thing is to just leave us be here, and we're going to discuss. You just have fun, think of a better joke than the one I told at the beginning of the debate, and then we're going to most likely see you at the announcements. So